Welcome back to the second part of my chat with Chris on nutrition and running. This week we talk about carb loading and bonking. I'm Louise and this is the Pilates for Busy People weekly show. Don't forget to come and join the Pilates for Runners Facebook group where we focus on strengthening the core, legs and reducing your risk of injuries, as well as talking about all things running. I'll put the links below. Hi, and welcome to the second part of the Pilates for Busy People weekly show with Chris and nutrition for running. So, hi again, Chris. So we are going to talk about carb loading, and I'm assuming that this is more important as we take the distance of our running up to half marathons to marathons. So
Yes.
what do we need to know and do in a sort of basic form?
Right. Well, people often say, when they hear the words carb loading, they just think it's about eating a lot of carbohydrates or pasta a few days prior to the event. And it's a bit more technical than that.
Right, we're listening.
Even though it looks like it, that'd be the shortest recording ever, but no, it's slightly technical than that. I mean, it's also dependent on the distance that you run. And if you're running, let's say, a half marathon or a time, let's say over 2 hours, for example, over 2 hours or a half marathon, and a carb load might work for you. And what a carb load does is it's the process of driving down your carbohydrate stores in your muscles over a period of a week to the point where when you then increase your carbohydrate intake, your body goes into what's called a supercompensation, where it stores more carbohydrates than it had prior to when you did the carbohydrate load.
Right.
You'll know happen because your body weight goes down during the carb load 3 or 4 days after you've started, and then it jumps up because your body is now holding on to more carbohydrate energy into the end of the carbohydrate load, and it just gives you more energy to be able to run when you do a longer distance.
Okay, and how? So if you were doing a 2 hour or over 2 hour, when would you start that? Sort of a week before,
Yeah,
and you just do
yeah.
that for a couple of days and then bring it back up again.
So what you do is, let's say a week before, you would also do a taper, and a taper is when people just have to reduce the distance that they're
Yeah,
running, and it can coincide along with this as well. So you reduce your running, but you need to run every day. It's the only thing with carb load. You need to run whilst you're carb loading because you're
yeah,
trying to drive down your carbohydrate stores. But you don't have to run very fast. You can just keep yourself running, keep yourself ticking over, and you drive down your stores, and then you'll slowly decrease the carbohydrate intake. Doesn't have to get down to zero. See, I mean, some people do this where it gets down to zero, but it's so tough on you mentally and physically that it's just not worth it. And actually, all the studies show that it makes no difference whether you go hard with the carbohydrate load
yeah,
or moderate carbohydrate load. So you just reduce your carbohydrate intake over 3 or 4 days, and then you start to increase them for the next 2 or 3 days. And then at the last 2 or 3 days, you should find that you're storing a lot more carbs or carbohydrate energy than you
yeah.
have prior to the carb load.
So when you get up to do your race or your long run in that morning, and
Yeah.
usually they start in the morning, you still need to eat carbs or longer, slower release carbs, I assume, that morning, like porridge or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, so you've got you've done your carb load, so you've got an extra sort of buffer in one sense. And then if you start, and most runs are, the longer the run, the earlier the start, because you've got to get officials and
Yeah,
marshals. So it has the added problem of what do you eat and how early do you eat that.
yeah,
And for some people, it may be you've got to eat at 6 in the morning to get ready for your run.
yeah,
Which again, to our last video, we talked about training your gut because you've got to get your body used to eating food that early in the morning. So that's
yeah,
a really big problem we have. But you will still eat in the morning, and you find that combined with the carbohydrate energy from the carb load, you've just got more fuel in the tank because your pre-race snack or meal keeps you going. But then when your body tries to draw on reserves, it has them from the carb load.
right. So that, and yeah, so that keeps it going. So
Yeah.
what about when you hit the wall, as I've known it as, not bonking?
So bonking is and it is a technical term. Bonking is hitting the wall, and all it is you've run out of carbohydrate energy.
Right.
When you're running, what's important to know is that you will fatigue at some point. All that these tips do, whether it's nutrition or hydration or even the training, all they do is they slow down that point as to when you fatigue. And if you know that's going to happen, then you know how to plan for it. But if
Right.
you don't, and you run out of carbohydrate energy, or you're just not up to the distance that you're trying to run, your body just like a car runs out of fuel, you absolutely run out of gas. And I've had it happen to me before. When it happens, there's nothing you can do. Absolutely nothing you can do.
And do you get the feelings beforehand? I mean, I've done half marathons. I've never done marathons.
No.
I've done half marathons. And I can't remember. I must have hit the wall at some point. Well, I obviously didn't because I carried on. But literally, if you hit the wall, you can't.
Yeah, you start slowing down. You slow down a little bit, but then once it happens, it's just it is almost as if it's immediate. You've got no energy left in your legs. Your legs go. You can't even pick your legs off the floor.
And so, even by just taking on fuel, suddenly that's not going to make a difference.
No, because when you're running, you'll always lose more fuel than you can take on board, and all hydration and any sort of pre-race fuel, all it does is it just slows down that point to fatigue. And the idea is that when you get to the end of the race, that you're almost at the end of your energy, and you've finished all your snacks, and you're pretty much done. That's the sort of the happy.
What you're aiming for. And is that what the marathon runners, the elite ones, that's what they do? Because they don't tend to hit the wall that often, do they?
No. So their bodies are used to running a certain. They know how fast to run a distance with the heart rate. They know what heart rate needs to be to burn the fuels they're burning, and also what to take on board. So when they finish, they're in the right zone.
Right zone.
Experience, which we saw end of last year, start of this year, where there's it was the Irish marathon runner. Remember when he was staggering over the
Irish?
No, it was the Australian, wasn't it?
I can't remember, but I remember seeing. I can't remember. Yeah, I remember seeing it.
And then the problem with this is that heat. So heat can then accelerate the point of fatigue,
which happened in the London Marathon last year, didn't it? Because it was a really hot marathon.
Yeah. You can have all the plan in the world. You know what time you're going to run. You've got your fuel sources beforehand, during. You add heat to it, and that goes out the window. So all these things need to be taken on board before you even consider turning up to that start line.
And training in heat is important as well. If you know that potentially the race day could be a hot day, so trying to get that training in and knowing how your body's going to react is really important too.
I would say, even though it's a slight detour from nutrition.
Sorry.
No.
Well, it's not, because it's still fuel that you need to think about, and water.
Yeah, it's so important because we had it's a client's friend last year who he was trying to run a sub 3-hour marathon, and he set off, and I had another client running he was trying to run a sub 3 hours 10. He did 3 hours 3 in the end. And I warned my client on the day. I said, when it's hot, you go off your heart rate. You ignore your time, because your body is having to deal with the extra stress and strain from the sun and heat. So he knew that, but the other guy who wasn't my client, he didn't. He just set off thinking he was going to run a certain speed and pace. And after half marathon pace, his speed got slower and slower and slower, and he couldn't believe it. And I said, well, you need to go off what your body's telling you on that day.
Yeah, exactly.
So that then comes down to, so if your heart is working harder than it needs to, you've got to take on more fluid, because you know what your sweat rate is, which we talked about in the last video.
Yeah.
You've got to take on a few more concentrated sports drinks, because you're going to burn through water much faster than you would on a cooler day.
Yeah. It's fascinating, and there's so much information, stuff out there to think about. But for our beginners, then it is about just learning to understand your bodies, I think, isn't it, and how they're feeling when you run, and trying. And I like that we talked about training your gut, so that you know how you're going to feel and know what you can take on board, and when you're starting to need it. So
a lot of people, what they do is they panic when they're doing particularly sort of half marathon distance and upwards, and they'll try weird and new funky things because their friends told them. Try this food. You've never tried it before, and you're doing it the day before the run. And honestly, this is no joke. It goes right up to elite level, where you have elite level athletes who will try a supplement on the day because their friend told them to do that. And one man in particular, he had it, and one of the side effects was immediate, best way to describe it, immediate emptying.
I knew what you were going to say, I think, yeah.
And it happened. He couldn't compete. It was an indoor rowing championships, and he couldn't compete because he tried. So the main thing is to experiment with what you know works.
Yeah.
Try to cope with not just more food, but the kind of foods that you want to eat as well.
Yeah.
there are so many ways to. I mean, one person said to me, "Well, can I have cereal?" Well, yeah, that works for you. Have cereal. You haven't got to eat quinoa, brown rice, and and sweet potatoes. If you don't like that, there's other things that you can have.
You can have, yeah.
To be fuel for you.
That was brilliant. Well, I hope that people are getting a load of information out of this. I'm sure they will have. I have. And I will be starting to think about my eating before I go out for a run now, definitely, with the dog. She runs on a full stomach, so I'm sure I can.
They've trained. Dogs, unfortunately, have got for millions of years of training their guts, so they're used to eating bolting straight away.
Yeah, no, they are. So it's brilliant. So thank you so much for this, Chris. I'm sure, it's been fascinating, and I will, again, as I said in the last video, put all your links below. So if people want to get in touch with you and find out more about nutrition and running and whatever, then they can contact you. Brilliant.
Great.
Thank you for coming.
I enjoyed this week's show. We're having a short break from the show to bring you some more Pilates-based videos. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out.